I'm Amy Griffiths, and you're listening to Island Life, where we're trying to help raise awareness about domestic abuse. The nature of this topic means that some listeners may find the content of this programme distressing. Domestic abuse is typically manifested as a pattern of abusive behaviour toward an intimate partner in a dating or family relationship where the abuser exerts power and control over the victim. It can be mental, physical, economic or sexual in nature. But how much of a problem is it here in the Isle of Man? In the 2023-24 financial year, there were 475 recorded victims of domestic abuse, of which 99 were repeat victims. It's up on the previous year's figures, which is said to be down to the enactment of new legislation. In January last year, the Domestic Abuse Act came into effect, which made it an official crime that people can be convicted of. 2 new offences are now available to police as a result. That's of domestic abuse and that's of coercive and controlling behaviour. Officers are also able to issue domestic abuse protection notices, or DAPNs, and domestic abuse protection orders, DAPOs, to give a victim immediate protection following an incident of domestic abuse. As a result of these measures being introduced, 20 DAPNs and 18 DAPOs were issued in the 2023-24 financial year. According to the Chief Constable's recent annual report, there were 57 new investigations into potential cases of domestic abuse, of which 61% were detected and 24% were unsupported. There were also 18 new controlling and coercive behaviour investigations, of which 36% were detected. Of course, these are only the cases that have been reported to the police. Many other victims suffer in silence. Lorna Trevethan is the CEO of Victim Support Isle of Man, a charity which supports those who've been affected by crime, including those who are victims of domestic abuse. They've recently held a conference hoping to highlight the situation on the Isle of Man. She's been explaining why.
We realised last year that we were turning 25 this year, and so we wanted to do something to mark that. Obviously, we've done lots of different things throughout the year, but we wanted to do something where we brought people together to really gain an understanding of the work that we actually do and have done over the past 25 years. So I actually chair the Domestic Abuse Forum for the Isle of Man. So we kind of thought, well, they wanted to do a conference. We wanted to pull something together. So we kind of joined those two things together to do a 2-day conference. So the first day is solely on domestic abuse, and that's pretty much hosted by the Domestic Abuse Forum. So we wanted to just do something where we can actually highlight the work that's going on in the community. Domestic abuse is a big issue on the island. I know the police see on average about 2 referrals a day, and obviously we have high numbers as well, and not all of those are reported to the police. So we wanted to showcase what support's available on the island, what the referral pathways are, but we don't want it all being doom and gloom. We want to really showcase the seriousness of domestic abuse and the impact it can have. But actually, we also want to show the hope at the other end of it as well. Domestic abuse is becoming more and more into the fore. People are starting to talk about it more, like we did with menopause a few years ago. We want to kind of bring it into the public arena, and we want to break down the taboos about talking about it and actually to say it's not okay that domestic abuse is happening. And then we want to look at how we can lower the numbers and obviously lower the incidence of domestic abuse. So a lot of the work that we're now doing as part of that forum and we'll be talking about on the day is that work, that intervention work, that support work. And we just want to highlight it really so people understand what domestic abuse is and what to look for and what support is available should they be a victim. I think we have to be very careful when we're saying we're seeing increases. I don't think incidents of domestic abuse are increasing. I think people are more willing to come forward now to obviously report it, especially with the changes of legislation last year, with the coercive control now being a separate offence and actually some successful prosecutions because of that. So I think people are wanting to talk about it more and aren't willing to suffer in silence anymore. Obviously during COVID, people kind of use that as a reset button, I think, almost to what's acceptable and what's not. And I think we're seeing an increase purely and simply around awareness that people are now talking about it more and want to come through the other side and have a life that doesn't involve domestic abuse. We don't want to scaremonger. We don't want people thinking that, this is on the rise. Absolutely not. We just think it's people wanting to come forward more. From this, we hope to do within the forum to start an awareness campaign that's a joint one, as opposed to just being victim support pushing this or that charity pushing this or that organisation. Actually putting a collective voice together is quite powerful, and it shows that we're all trying to work together to support that in those individuals at the heart of everything that we do, certainly at Victim Support. To know that there's hope there, there's support there, and actually if we're talking about it, getting out into the corporate world so that they have an understanding of it, adopting domestic abuse policies in the UK, they're now coming more and more into the fore. So that's something that we'd be very encouraging to see on the island, is that companies actually looking at it and not just understanding how they support the victim if they come forward, but actually what do they do if someone's an alleged perpetrator as well. So it's quite a minefield, but we want to try and do that collectively for the good of the island, and collective voice is more powerful than one voice.
Lorna Trevethan from Victim Support there. So the message is one of hope for those who are experiencing domestic abuse. Natalie Collins is a survivor and now provides training courses and resources helping people to reclaim their lives. I spoke to her at the conference.
We are wanting to make sure that everybody leaves here understanding what abuse is, why somebody perpetrates abuse, and how we can support those who are subject to abuse. I think there can often be this idea that people who are subject to abuse are kind of different to everyone else, kind of those women, that none of us actually know. The reality is all of us will know women who've been subject to abuse. All of us will know children who are living in homes where somebody is perpetrating harm to that mother and her children. And so we all have a responsibility to work on this. But I think one of the things that I'm really keen to ensure that people know today is how amazing and incredible women who are subject to abuse are. That this isn't, it's very often we kind of approach this topic and it is absolutely horrific and it is terrible what men do to women. But actually, the women who are subject to abuse are the most strongest, the most incredible women. And so it's really important that we also are seeing this as an opportunity to honour the amazing women who are doing the best they can for their children, the best they can for themselves. And so I think for me, that's as important that we understand and honour women as it is that we talk about the horrors of what men do to women.
And of course, domestic abuse can go both ways. It can also be men as victims as well. But do you think raising that awareness of what exactly abuse is important? Because as victims and perpetrators even, you may not necessarily understand what coercion is, what actually constitutes as domestic abuse.
Yeah, well, I would say perpetrators are pretty clear about what abuse is because they're getting what they want from it. So I'd say for perpetrators, there's a very clear idea about what abuse is. But actually, for many of us, when we're subject to abuse, we don't recognise it. We don't understand that's what's going on. And so it's really important that there is this assumption that if somebody's being abused, they'll know it and they'll go and say to somebody, I'm being abused. Actually, most people absolutely won't know that that's what's going on. Most family and friends won't know what's going on. And so I think it's really important that we all start from a position of, actually, I probably don't know as much about this as I need to. And so it's great that this conference is taking place. And a decade ago, when I came onto the island to do stuff around this subject, actually there just wasn't the level of interest that is coming out now. And so I think that's a really amazing and positive sign for the island, that yes, that kind of, and actually increased reporting is a good sign because it means women are feeling safer to come forward. So while it could be seen as a negative thing that there's more abuse, there probably isn't more abuse. There's probably just women are feeling safer to come and talk about that, and that's really incredibly helpful.
And in terms of the community coming together, how can we all be better at recognising signs and being there for those who are victims and being a safe place that they can go to speak about this to?
Yeah, I think first of all, a lot of this is just about basic human care. So when somebody talks to us, we need to be curious instead of assuming, oh, well, it must just be a bad relationship. Oh, probably she's exaggerating. Oh, he's a lovely man. I can't imagine that's what's going on. We need to start from a point of curiosity and assume that there is no person that we know that couldn't be being subject to this stuff. And so what I would be saying is start from a point of curiosity and start from a point of considering, could this be abuse? And then basically go from there, starting from, rather than going, well, this can't be abuse and needing lots and lots of convincing that it is, start from a point of view of maybe something that's going on that's dangerous or harmful to this person, and it's my job to reserve judgment. I think sometimes we feel we're being judgmental if we think something's abusive, but actually we're making a judgment as much if we say it's not abuse. And so I think that being a bit more neutral would be a really good start.
Natalie Collins from the Own My Life course.
Once you see my black mascara, run from Designer bags under my eyes. Oh, how you try to understand what you done me, what you done me, what you done.
I'm Amy Griffiths, and you're listening to Island Life, where we're trying to help raise awareness about domestic abuse. And the people in the best place to do that are those who've seen it firsthand. First of all, I've been speaking to David Challen. His mum Sally's case was a landmark one for a number of reasons. We'll hear from David shortly, but this is Sally's story.
They'd been together for 40 years, but the smiles in the photographs gave no clue as to how this marriage would end. On a summer's day in 2010, when Sally Challen bludgeoned Richard to death with a hammer. At her trial, she was portrayed as a jealous wife who had found out about his latest affair. But Sally's family say she was the victim of decades of coercive control. That became a criminal offence in 2015, after Sally was convicted. Her lawyers said Richard would tell her what to eat, what to wear, who she could see. He controlled her money, and when she found out about affairs, he made her think she was going mad. Her barrister told the court, had the jury had the benefit of the evidence going to coercive control, as well as an understanding of the dynamic of coercive control, then they would have come to a different conclusion, and the appellant would have been convicted of voluntary manslaughter.
After nearly a decade, Sally Challen is finally free. A huge moment for her, her family, and for British law.
I just wanted to say how happy I am, and I want to thank my legal team and all my family who stood behind me and stood with me through all of this.
In court, prosecutors announced they would accept her plea of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. With her legal team successfully arguing she was coerced and controlled, Sally Challen has made legal history in a case which may now bring hope to others.
My name is David Challen. I'm the youngest son of Sally Challen, and my mother killed my father in 2010. And only years later do we explore and find a voice to give voice to the abuse that we witnessed and saw in the home that my mother experienced, and that is coercive control. You know, as a law, it came in England and Wales in 2015, and friends and family, as well as my mother, and new evidence of psychological reports helped give a cumulative picture to a pattern of abusive actions over 40 years that led to a loss of control, that gave a deeper understanding as to what happens with domestic abuse. That it is power and control, and that the first instance isn't often physical assaults. It is threats and intimidation, a pattern of regulatory behaviour that exerts behind the doors of the home. And so very much as a child survivor of domestic abuse, I helped give voice to that. That helped set my mother free a decade early from prison and give voice to so many other victims of domestic abuse and coercive control. So really speaking out here today is to give voice to children and families' experiences of coercive control and the escalating pattern of violence that precipitates the dangerous events of murder that we all need to be aware of.
How do you even, I don't even know how you answer this question, because how do you even begin to process what's happened when all of these events unfolded?
Oh, it's a staggering of knowledge, and something is bad in the home with a gut feeling as a child, and not being able to put a finger on what that is or have a language to that, to then find that out multiple decades later is something that's really quite staggering to learn that victims and survivors aren't afforded that protection in society or awareness, and that's already a part of this event, is to create that conversation, create that discussion, so that we are talking about it. It's not just about toxic behaviours, these are abusive behaviours, and once we label it that, we can report and give voice to so many children behind these doors of these homes, and families and victims to stop that escalation, stop that pattern, and reach out for support.
Talk to me a bit about the impact as well that the coercive behaviour and the abuse had on you and your family as you were growing up, and from a child's perspective as well, because I think it's quite often we talk about the direct victim, but we don't talk about the indirect ones outside of it as well.
Yeah, I think it's taken me, even since when my mother was freed, a long time for me to acknowledge that I am a survivor or a victim of domestic abuse, and own my own right to not feel as if I'm co-opting someone else's harm. I have a right to my own harm of what I've been impacted, and what that's led me to, how I see relationships and how I view relationships, and just the happiness of a home, and was it happy, and how controlled that environment is, and to come to terms with that, and also acknowledge how many adults are walking around the world who feel they don't have a right to, just by witnessing abuse in the home, call themselves survivors and victims, and what perhaps harms are we not collating later in life in services, whether it's self-harm or inflicting harm on others or addiction. Are we asking the right questions? Are we really unfurling or that thread of knowledge of what happened in their lives earlier in the homes of where they witnessed domestic abuse? And I think that's really the power to what I'm trying to give voice to today.
And you've obviously dedicated so much of your life to campaigning for this issue and raising awareness. And one, I would suppose, why is it something that you really want to get out to the wider community? But two, how are you able to digest your feelings, to be able to put that to one side, to be able to give talks like this and talk about your experiences openly for those who are struggling with coming to terms with their own trauma as well?
I think the currency is stories. You have to get stories out, and survivors sharing stories is so powerful and important. And I feel there always see so many missed opportunities in my family story of being able to reach out. My mum spoke to colleagues, spoke to managers, spoke to a GP, spoke to a counsellor. If any of them had the language of coerced control, there would have been an availability to stop that escalation of violence and to stop the harm that is kind of insidious and deep rooted within myself to come to terms with. That's precipitated as an adult into different harms or different addictions. And so I think there's really an importance to share stories where you can. I may not have the ability to always do this throughout the year, but where I can, I think it's really important to do so. And for as many survivors that do speak out, it really gives voice to the harms and awareness that we all need to enact upon, because I certainly would have wanted a family in front of me doing the exact same thing, so to stop these events.
And do you feel like it's important as well, because of course men can also be victims, but for a man as yourself to be publicly standing up here and talking about this openly, do you think that makes a difference as well, having that perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I'm a man that's been inflicted, by men's violence against women, in the hands of my father. But also, I'm in intimate partner relationship. I've experienced that too, and I think there's something to be said, for the awareness of empathy that we need to have for women's experiences who are predominantly more affected. That does not negate or should not disenfranchise men from feeling that they should speak out. There needs to be more male voices to centre their experiences too. I think there's no blanket approach to tackling domestic abuse, but as a man, it feels important to speak out about it because of the harm that is enacted day in, day out, in the homes of many families and the women that are killed.
It's funny because I've got a little boy myself, and I remember when I found out that I was having a boy, I felt this weight of pressure because I felt like there's so much responsibility to raise him to be an active participant in making things better in the world, and a big part of that is towards misogyny and treatment of women. And how do you think we can all do that better?
I think it's a collaboration of safe spaces in the classroom to learn, to have conversations, to fill that discussion, not labelling them as abusers out of the room, of course not. It's to recognise, the systems and oppression, and obviously that old-fashioned word patriarchy that still has an impression and imprints young women and girls growing up, though it doesn't for young men who don't feel the other sex walking down the road of a woman, walking behind them. That's just the state of play, that's a fact. And so I think, it's a collaboration between schools and family environments too, to have those discussions and talk about it empathetically to young men and boys.
David Challen sharing his family's experience of domestic abuse. Someone else whose family has forever been changed as a result of domestic violence is Diana Parks. Her daughter Jo Simpson, who grew up on the Isle of Man, was brutally killed at the hands of her estranged husband. Some listeners may find the following story distressing.
My name's Detective Constable 4151, Melanie Ward, and this is interview room 5. And if you could just let us know your name, that'd be great.
Robert Brown.
Robert, you've been arrested this morning on suspicion of the murder of Joanna Brown.
Joanna Brown may have enjoyed the lifestyle of a wealthy heiress
at her mansion in Ascot,
on the edge of Great Windsor Park.
But she and her estranged husband were going through a messy divorce.
47-year-old Robert Brown,
an airline pilot who's originally from Edinburgh,
bludgeoned Joanna Brown to death
in a frenzied attack.
He beat Joanna around the head at least 14 times with a claw hammer.
The couple's 2 children cowered in their playroom, fully aware of what was happening.
Brown then dumped Joanna in a makeshift grave he'd prepared weeks earlier.
There were gasps from Joanna Brown's family as the jury found Robert Brown not guilty of murder.
Brown was sentenced to 26 years in prison for manslaughter.
But is due for release later this year, halfway through his sentence.
And the only person on this planet who can change this is the Secretary of State for Justice.
I paid tribute to Joanna's mother and to Joanna's friends for the tireless campaign they'd made. So I made an undertaking to them that I would do everything I properly and lawfully could to ensure that justice was done in this case. And that's why, using the powers that are available under the 2022 Act, I have exercised my discretion to block his automatic release, which would otherwise have happened.
Brown will now be referred to the parole board, who will examine whether it is safe for him to be freed or whether he should remain in jail.
Diana still lives on the island, and she's been telling me her daughter's story.
Well, my daughter Jo was brought up on the island and lived here. She went to school here, and very sadly her estranged husband killed her. He hit her over the head 14 times with a claw hammer in October 31st, Halloween, 2010.
And as it obviously would, you can see the impact that this still has on you 14 years later, because something like this never leaves you, does it?
Never leaves you, no. You actually, the wound heals, but the scar remains.
And interestingly, actually, it was only earlier this year that his release was blocked by government, and he was told that he had to remain in jail, which would obviously have come as welcome news to the family. But how does it feel when it's been such a public story that then keeps coming up in the news and is covered so heavily? How does that impact you and your family?
Well, actually, we worked for it to be in the public, because, to be honest, it was such an absolute miscarriage of justice. I mean, everybody in the world, except the jury, thought that it was a total murder conviction. It was so horrendous. And somehow he hoodwinked the jury.
When it came out that your daughter had been experiencing abuse from her estranged husband for years, and were you aware of that at the time? Did she confide in you? And
well, in 2007, July the 17th, he attacked her with a knife. And she said to him, "What'll happen if you kill me?" And he said, "You'll be dead, I'll be in prison." There was absolutely no mention of what would happen to the children. He then went off to the spare bedroom. She managed to talk him out of killing her. And he said, "I expect you're going to ring the police and ruin my career." He was a captain, a British Airways captain. And she didn't phone the police, but she phoned a friend who wanted to phone the police. This was late at night. This was about 11 o'clock at night. And she didn't want him to the children to know what he'd done to her, which, when you look back, would have been so much easier than what did happen to her.
How do you find the strength? Because you, as you say, you were adamant that you wanted this to be in the public eye and you wanted people to be talking about Jo and about what happened to her. How do you find the strength to do that?
If we hadn't campaigned, he would have been coming out of jail last November the 6th without going through the parole board, because that was his sentence. He was given 26 years and a determinate sentence, which meant he only served 13 years, would come out of jail without going through the parole board and be on licence for 13 years. Who would monitor him for 13 years? The probation service sadly is broken, and there just aren't the people to care.
So what more can, here on the Isle of Man, obviously this was treated as a case in the UK, but here on the Isle of Man, what more can government and also all of the statutory boards and people involved and just the community in general, how can we do better to stop these incidents happening?
We have made the Isle of Man an exclusion zone, should he come out, but when Alex Chalk stopped him coming out of jail, he actually asked for a judicial review, and at the judicial review the judge found that he is now more dangerous than when he went into prison. And he's had an added thing to his sentence. He now can't be with children under the age of 16. He has a son who was born after he'd killed my daughter, age 13. and he cannot be alone with children under 16. And also, he is a critical public protection case. He's never been allowed to go into an open prison, and he would have just come out of prison unless we had campaigned.
You mentioned your grandchildren. How are they now? Are they happy? As happy as they can be?
They are. They're brilliant. I love them to bits, and they've been my salvation, to be honest. I don't know how I would have coped without them.
So what's the main message that you're hoping to be able to share with the group today?
I just hope people become aware of domestic abuse, coercive control, which is something that wasn't known when Joe was killed in 2010. It's so good that that's come into the arena now.
Diana Parks speaking to me there. The main message here is if you or someone you love is suffering domestic abuse, help is available. The police will listen to you if you come forward to report an incident. You can call the non-emergency number on 631 212 or use 999 if you're in immediate danger. You can also contact victim support on 679 950 or visit their website victimsupport.im. You've been listening to Island Life. You can listen back to this programme on manxradio.com or by subscribing to Manx Radio podcasts using your usual podcast provider.